Women who weren't academics got really excited about her work in the 1970s in the second wave of feminism because they felt she was uncovering at last an alternate history in the West, a heritage that was actually empowering, a new narrative that honored women's bodies, women's ways, and returned to them a millennia-long tradition of goddess worship across the Western and Near Eastern world. As far as many of Maria's colleagues were concerned, this was the equivalent of digging her own scholarly grave and burying her academic reputation alive to follow these lines of inquiry. Her work was no less thorough, thoughtful, or well-researched than before, but she had begun to adopt a more interdisciplinary approach in her work, weaving in her knowledge of folklore and linguistics to interpret the figurines and pottery she was uncovering, and probably her intuition too. And this kind of interdisciplinary approach is not super acceptable in the archaeological field, or most academic disciplines, to be honest. It's quite sensible, isn't it? You know, in a way, she was working in what I would describe as a much more feminine way. So this interdisciplinary technique, which she developed in order to interpret what she was seeing using all of her experience, all the different parts of herself, is now called archaeomythology. And it still is a field of inquiry used by scholars today, albeit maybe not very well known. And it's these stories, these kinds of stories, like literally Gilgamesh, that we were taught, not the images of literally thousands of female figurines excavated out of the very same ground in the Near and Middle East from older cultures. I was not taught that abundant evidence exists in the form of pottery, these clay figurines, and excavated settlement sites, which demonstrates that long before the rise of Mesopotamian city-states, radically different cultures flourished across the region. Cultures abundant in female deities, tomb wall paintings celebrating the regenerative capacity of the vulva, of the womb, of the breasts. Those in the 8th millennium BCE Çatalhöyük in present-day Turkey. People at this time in Çatalhöyük had already domesticated numerous plants and animals and were growing gardens and crops and tending animals as well as hunting and gathering. We might therefore say, if we wanted to pinpoint such a thing, that Çatalhöyük is an origin point of civilization in the region. But I think this term itself is actually quite problematic. It immediately implies a hierarchy that settled agriculturalists are more civilized than hunting and gathering cultures. And furthermore, that the two are somehow antithetical, which is just a falsehood. Both of these things are a falsehood. And we can see how this kind of thinking that settled agriculture and what that looks like from a Western European point of view is somehow more civilized than hunting and gathering or horticultural cultures. We can see how that went in North America, right, with settler colonialism. Therefore, the concept of early civilizations, trying to pinpoint where that is, what that means, I don't find terribly useful. However, it's the way we're taught things. And it's even the way that Gimbutas frames old Europe as a civilization, because she is suggesting something earlier and from a very different pattern, from a very different mold than the classic descriptions of civilization that we learn in school.